the idea that anyone who's worked with guns at all must have heard this admonishment to treat every gun as if it is loaded, right? And you actually, last night when I alleged that you believed in God, you corrected me. You said, no, you live as if God exists, right? And so this seems like there's a connection here. So if I had a gun here that I wanted to show Brett, if I know anything about guns, I'm going to make damn sure that it's unloaded, right? I'm going to pull back the slide, I'm going to drop the magazine, pull back the slide, check the chamber, and do this in a redundant fashion that really looks like I'm suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder. I mean, it is truly redundant. And then I'll hand it to Brett, and if Brett knows anything about guns, he will do the same thing, having just seen me do it. And if he hands it back to me, again, I will do the same thing, even though there may be no ammunition around, right? So it really is crazy at the level of our explicit knowledge of the situation, and yet absolutely necessary to do. And it's not merely, it runs very deep. I mean, that whole time you're careful not to point the barrel of the gun at anything you would be afraid to shoot. And when people fail to live this way around guns, they, with some unnerving frequency, actually shoot themselves or people close to them by accident. So it is really the only proper hedge against just the odds of being in proximity to loaded weapons. And yet, if someone in the middle of this operation came up to us and said, actually there's a casino that just opened across the street that will take your bets about whether or not guns are loaded. Would you like to bet $1 million as to whether or not this gun is loaded? Well, of course, I would bet those $1 million every time that it's not loaded because I know it's not loaded. Right? So there's a literal truth and a metaphorical truth, otherwise known as a very useful fiction, which in this case is actually more useful than the truth, right? But the only way I can understand its utility is, and even utter the phrase metaphorical truth in a way that's comprehensible, is in the context of distinguishing it from literal truth. Yeah, go ahead.
This is fascinating, Sam, actually. This is I think, next phase of...
I'm worried by how excited you are.
So I have a little story that might be helpful about that, and so you can tell me what you think about. You can think about this. Okay, so one of the things that I've been reconsidering since we talked last night is the nature of our dispute about the relationship between facts and values, because I think I can make a case that what I've been trying to do, especially in my first book, was to ground values in facts. But I'm not doing it the same way that you are exactly. So I don't want to make that a point of contention. And I'll get to that in a moment. But with regards to this metaphorical truth, let me tell you something. You tell me what you think about this. So one of the things that's been observed by anthropologists worldwide is that human beings tend to make sacrifices. So I'm going to spend 3 minutes, laying out a sacrificial story. And the reason I want to do it is because, see, what I think happened with regards to the origin of these profound stories is that people first started to behave in certain ways that had survival significance, and that was selected for as a consequence of the standard selection practices, and so that was instantiated in behavior. And then because we could observe ourselves, because we're self-conscious creatures, that we started to make representations of those patterns and dramatize them and then encapsulate them in stories. So it's a bottom-up so it would be sort of like chimpanzees or wolves become aware of their dominance hierarchy structures and the strategies that they use. So a wolf, for example, if two wolves are having a dominance dispute, the wolf that gives up first lays down and puts his neck open so the other wolf can tear it out, and then the other wolf doesn't. And you could say, well, it's as if a wolf is following a rule about not killing a weaker member of the pack. Of course, wolves don't have rules. They have behavioral patterns. But a self-conscious wolf would watch what the wolves were doing and then say, well, it's as if we're acting out the idea that each wolf in the pack has intrinsic value. And then that starts to be, and maybe the wolves would have a little story about the heroic forbearing wolf that doesn't tear out the neck of its opponents, and that's a good wolf. Well, that's good wolf ethics, and so, but it's grounded in the actual behavior. Okay, so we'll put that aside for a second. Now, here's the sacrificial story. So human beings have made sacrifices. It seems to be a standard practice all around the world. And in the biblical narratives, they would often sacrifice something of value, like a valuable animal.
Well, like a child. Let's start.
Well, look. I'm not making light of this. I know that human sacrifice was a part of this.
Yeah,
And
but that's again. So just to give you a crib on where my mind goes here is human sacrifice is as old a religious precept as we know about.
Yes.
It's a cultural universal. The other sacrifices are derivations from it. Circumcision is a surrogate for the far more barbaric act of human sacrifice, and it answers every test you would put to it with respect to its archetypal significance, its compelling presence in stories across all cultures. But the horror is that it actually has taken place in all these cultures based on explicit beliefs in the presence of just
right. Well, Arthur
oppressive
Koestler,
scientific ignorance.
Arthur
right?
Koestler used that as the argument for the essential insanity of humanity. Right?
No, but it's not just the insanity of humanity. It's the misapprehension of the causal structure of the cosmos. You don't know what controls the weather.
Well,
you don't know why people get sick. You think your neighbor is capable of casting magic spells on you. You're ignorant of everything, and you're trying to force some order on things. And so when you don't, in the absence of engineers, and you don't know why certain buildings fall down, you actually can agree with your neighbor that maybe you should bury your firstborn child into every post hole of this new building, which in fact took place. And it's the consequence of ignorance. And so that the problem is, if you're only going to talk about this purified notion of sacrifice.
But it's a very strange consequence of ignorance, Sam.
It's the notion that we're in relationship to invisible others that can mistreat us based on our not having offered enough. Not precisely those others.
Well, but we're in relationship to the invisible others who will judge us in the future.
Okay, you're changing the noun in important ways.
I know, but I'm also trying to understand, and I'm not trying to argue against the horror of child sacrifice.
No, I would never imagine you would.
I know. But I'm also trying to.
But my work would be much easier if you did that.
Yes, and the work of journalists as well. Although they've tried that pretty much anyways.
That's right.
So. Right, that would even be worse than enforced monogamy, hypothetically.
No doubt.
Yes. So see, let's say that I'm trying to give the devil his due, and I'm trying to understand from an evolutionary perspective, like a cognitive, behavioral evolutionary perspective, let's say, why that particular set of ideas would emerge, and in many places, perhaps autonomously, or once having emerged, would spread like wildfire. It's like, because I'm not willing to only attribute it to ignorance. Now, we can attribute it to ignorance, no problem, man. But there's more going on there because it is a human universal. And there's all sorts of things that happen in nature as a consequence of biological and evolutionary processes that don't work out well for our current state of moral intuition, let's say.
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things, because I've been thinking about this sacrificial motif for a very long time, and trying to figure out what the hell's the idea here exactly. And so here's one way of thinking about it. If you give up something of value now, you can gain something of more value in the future. Okay, so let's think about that idea for a minute. So the first thing is, that's a hell of an idea.
Yeah,
that's delayed gratification.
Yeah, delayed gratification.
That's right. That's the discovery of the future as well. And so you might say, well, the notion of sacrifice is exactly the same thing as the discovery of the future. If we give up something we really value now, we can make a pact with the structure of existence itself such that better things will happen to us in the future. Now, okay, now, what's weird about this, and it's hard to understand, is that it works. So when I talk to my students, for example, and I say, what did your parents sacrifice to send you to university? Many of them are children of first-generation immigrants. And so, man, they're on that story in a second, right? They know all sorts of things that their parents sacrificed. And they're delaying gratification in the present for a radically delayed return in the future. Now, you think animals, generally speaking, they might act out the idea of delayed gratification as a consequence of running out their instincts, but they don't conceptualize it. It's not obvious that animals give up something they value right now in order to thrive in the future. There's an old story about how to catch a monkey, right? So you put a jar up with rocks in it, and you put little candies, and it's a narrow-necked jar. You put little candies on top of the rocks. You put a few candies in front of the jar. Then the monkey comes along and picks up the candies, puts his hand in the jar, grabs the candies, and can't get it out.
Yeah, I still don't know if this actually works on monkeys or if it's just a great story.
Well, I don't know. I don't know either. And I've heard various claims. But the point is, you can go pick up the monkey. He won't let go of the candies. Now, perhaps he would. But the issue is that it's not obvious that animals will forego an immediate gratification for a future gratification.
I don't think that's right, actually. And I actually want to hold.
Well, the question is, will they do it consciously? They might act it out. They act it out. That's not the issue.
It's very hard to know if it's conscious because they won't respond to the questionnaires. But
I know. And obviously, the line between acting it out and starting to consciously represent it is a tenuous one. But what looks to me like what happened is that after we observed that people who were capable of delaying gratification sacrificed things that they valued in order to obtain a future goal, and it worked, that we started to codify that as a representation and then started to act it out. And so the story, and you'd say, well, that produced strange variants, but there's a reason for that too, as far as I can say. So imagine this. Imagine that there's a rule of thumb. Sacrificing what you find valuable now will ensure certain benefits in the future. Well, then the question becomes, how good could those future benefits be? And so that might be heavenly, let's say, in the archetypal extreme. And what's the ultimate sacrifice that you have to perform? And then I would say, well, the child sacrifice fits into that category. And so it's as if those ideas were pushed to the radical extreme. And you could say, well, that's a pathological extreme. It's like, well, it is a pathological extreme, but I think we also have to understand that some of the things that we've learned as we've evolved towards our current state of wisdom, such as it is that they were learned in a very bloody and catastrophic way. They were learned with incredible difficulty. And delay of gratification was certainly one of those, because it's a hell of a thing to learn when you're in conditions of privation.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the issue here for me is that you don't need a conception of, you don't need any kind of positive gloss on human sacrifice as a meme or as an archetype in order to form a coherent picture of the future that can motivate you. So delayed gratification is fully separable from a notion that it might ever be rational or good to sacrifice a child as an offering to an invisible other that doesn't exist.
But how do you know it's separable? Because that's the developmental history. As you said, the sacrifices
even if
came first.
I think it is in fact historically separable, but let's just say it's not. Let's just say it's a matter of our origins. They're united. They're of a piece. It is the genetic fallacy to care about that origin. I mean, to say that that is the only path forward toward a notion of the future, given where we've come from, or that it's somehow necessary to venerate now, or that it's good that we took that path.
But we do venerate the idea of sacrifice now. But I would say that
but
what's happened
I would say we do it to the detriment of our moral intuitions in the religious context. So, for instance, I think that the notion that Christianity is actually a cult of human sacrifice. Christianity is not a religion that repudiates human sacrifice. Christianity is a religion that says, actually, no, human sacrifice is necessary, and there was only one that, in fact, was necessary and effective, and that's the sacrifice of Jesus. And I think that is, when you dig into the details, not only a morally uninteresting vision of our circumstance and how we can be redeemed, it's morally abhorrent. Okay. Right? So I think there's better versions online.
Let me ask you a question about that. So, in the moral landscape, you lay out this pathway. There's the bad life, and there's the good life, right? And you described what they were, and the bad life is a variation of hellish circumstances, and the good life is a variant of hypothetically the life that we would like to lead. And your conception is that and correct me if I'm wrong, your conception is that the proper pathway forward, so that would be the moral endeavor, is to move away from the bad and towards the good.
Yeah, insofar as we understand which way is up, yes.
Yes, yes.
The basic claim is that we can be right or wrong with respect to our beliefs there.
True.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily know how to do that in an unerring manner, and we could subject that to approximation, correction along the way, and we should, but we can outline the broad scheme, which is progress away from hell towards something that's positive. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I would say that there's an implicit claim in that you should sacrifice everything in you that isn't serving that to that. And I would say that that's essentially the same claim that's made in Christianity.
Well, again, that is I understand the impulse to up-level these barbaric, ignorance-derived beliefs, right, to something that is morally, that is interesting and palatable in the current context. And I understand you can do that. My concern there is you can do that with everything. I mean, you could do it with witchcraft. Why not do the exact same thing you're doing with religion to the history of witchcraft? Witchcraft is as well
Well, modern
described.
witches would do that, so that's a perfectly valid
Right,
criticism.
that should be of concern. I mean, there are reasons why we don't want to endorse modern witchcraft, right?
Look, absolutely, and so one of your
But I mean, I'm not talking. And modern witchcraft currently exists. I mean, you go to Africa, people are hunting albinos for their body parts because they believe in sympathetic magic, and kids get killed as witches. So this belief endures in certain pockets of humanity, and we're right to. I mean, I just think at a certain point you have to acknowledge that some ideas are not only wrong, but their effects are disastrous, or have been disastrous, or will likely be, even if good in certain circumstances, will likely be disastrous in the future. And then we shouldn't be hostage to these ancient memes. We shouldn't have to figure out how to make the most of the worst idea that anyone's ever had, which is maybe you should sacrifice your firstborn child to a being you've never seen.
Hold on, Sam. I want to hold your feet to the fire here a little bit. 2 points. One, interesting observation. When you presented the example, so on your podcast I had argued that believing that porcupines can throw their quills might protect you from a porcupine that might wheel around even though porcupines can't throw their quills. Your listener sent the better example, which was all guns are loaded. When you presented it, you didn't say all guns are loaded. Well, you said treat all guns as if they are loaded, which is, I think, the same reflex that you have faced with any metaphorical truth, which is that it can always be unpacked.
But actually, that's the way Jordan talks about believing in God as well.
Right, and actually, so this is. But then, if we take something like you say, all right, sacrifice of children is abhorrent. Let's say it is, and then you say, well, Christianity hasn't foregone the sacrifice of children. In fact, it's described one child who is sacrificed for everybody else. But arguably, that's an upgrade of some metaphorical truth that frees those who are adhering to this tradition from ever considering sacrificing a child. And what it does is it provides a motivational structure that may, in fact, have very positive outgrowths, though not literal, the idea that someone would have sacrificed their own child for the benefit of everybody else not to have to. That idea might engender a large amount of good work that would result, as Jordan is pointing out.
Let me just concede that the hardest case for me, I mean, which I did up top, just in defining, after you define metaphorical truth, and I used the gun example, there's certainly cases where the useful fiction is more useful than the truth. I would grant that, but I think those cases are few and far between. But handling guns is one of them. It's just not useful when the casino opens across the street and you can place $1 million bet, right? Then you want to have some purchase on the literal truth. So you want to be able to, and again, this is psychologically interesting because, and I keep coming back to the gun example because it's the one that is viscerally real to me. Like if I have a real gun that I know to be unloaded, I still emotionally can't treat it as a harmless object. I can't point it at my child just for the fun of it because, that we're going to play cops and robbers now with a real gun, right? I have a superstitious attachment to always being safe with the gun, right?
Okay,
and it's important. It's important that get ingrained, and yet it is not strictly it's not irrational because it has good effects, but it's not actually in register with what I know to be true factually in each moment.
Right. So it's
so
very low
here's-
cost.
Yeah,
It's very low
It's
cost.
very low cost. It's not
Yep.
dividing societies and
Yep.
causing people to go to war.
And if you were going to teach a child gun safety, you would want to encode this so that they
Yes.
would automatically know never to behave as if a gun is unloaded, because that's what gets you into trouble.
Yeah.
As an adult, every gun owner recognizes the distinction between the metaphorical truth and the literal truth here. But I guess what I suspect is going on here is that your mechanism for dealing with the world involves unpacking all of these things. And I think it's highly productive. But it also means that you have a hard time understanding why anybody would do anything different. And that's the question, is just because we can track fully the difference between guns actually all being loaded and behaving as if all guns are loaded, right? That one, there's no leftover. There's no mystery there, right? But there may be many of these things for which there is some difficulty lining up the metaphorical truth with the literal truth, and operating according to the metaphorical truth might have advantages, which I think is what you're getting at.
So here's another situation, because we have to remember what kind of catastrophic past we emerged from and how much privation ruled the world prior to 1895, essentially. And certainly the farther back you go, the more bloody and horrible it was. I mean, how often do you think it was necessary, and this is not obviously something I'm in favor of, and this is also one of these situations where we get to play with ideas that we might not otherwise play with. How often do you think it was necessary for people in the past who had absolutely no access to birth control and who didn't have enough food to sacrifice a child for the survival of their family? I mean, God only knows, and that's, but that's worth thinking about. It's like, life is unbelievably cruel and difficult. And one of the problems that comes when you discover the future is that you might have to make the most painful of sacrifices. And lots of archaic people do this sort of thing. They do that with their elderly people. They do that with sick people. They do that with infants that they deem too fragile to survive. So part of child sacrifice, and I know the literature on child sacrifice reasonably well, part of child sacrifice seemed to emerge out of the observable necessity to leave someone behind so that everyone else didn't die. And we don't know how often that had to happen in the past. It might have had to happen a lot.
Right.
Now, obviously...
Although, just in the interest of kind of conceptual clarity here, human sacrifice is a larger horror than that. So you have, what was very common is the sacrificing of, captives. So you take the Aztec sacrifices where you now have slaves, some of whom you're going to...
Yeah, the Aztecs sacrificed about 25,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, it's clearly a bloody mess. There's no doubt about that. But, one of the things that you see happening in the biblical narrative, which is extraordinarily interesting, is that you see echoes of child sacrifice at the beginning, but what happens is the sacrificial notion gets increasingly psychologized as the story progresses. So, you see that transition with Abraham and Isaac, where the child sacrifice is actually forbidden, although previously demanded by God. And then you also see it, as you already laid out, in the substitution of the circumcision for the idea of sacrifice itself.
Right.
And then what seems to happen, I'm trying to figure out how these ideas develop psychologically from their behavioral underpinnings, is that eventually it becomes psychologized completely. So you can say, well, we can conceptualize a sacrifice in the abstract, so my parents can sacrifice to send me to university without anything or anyone having to die. It transforms itself from something that's enacted out as a dramatic ritual into something that's a psychological reality. But all that blood and catastrophe along the way is part of the process by which the idea comes to emerge.
Right. So what is the connection of all of this? Because, yes, so there is this history, and I would argue we are busily trying to outgrow much of it, if not most of it, whether it's evolutionary history or just the cultural history.
We might be trying to transmute it. so that it becomes, we can maintain, as you've suggested we do, we can maintain what's useful in the tradition and throw out everything that's pathological.
Yes, but we're constantly discovering a lack of fit between both what we perceive in ourselves as biological imperatives and the cultural legacies of just what mommy and daddy taught me was true, right? Which we have now every reason to believe might not be true. And we're trying to optimize our thoughts and institutions and relationships with one another for our current circumstance, and yet we have this legacy effect of certain books and certain ways of speaking have a completely different status, and they have this status because they may in fact, it's imagined, not be the products of merely previous human minds, but they may be the products of omniscience. And this is where the respect accorded to religious tradition is totally unlike the respect we would accord to anything else. Mythology, literature, past science, past philosophy. I mean, people can read Plato and Aristotle for their entire lives without ever being fully captured by the kind of dogmatism that every religion demands that you be captured by if you're really going to be an adherent.
I would say that's actually an archetypal truth. The idea that the pathological tradition stands in the way of update. That's an archetypal truth. I mean, one of the reasons why in creation myths, one of the variants of a creation myth is that the hero has to slay a tyrannical giant in order to make the world out of his pieces. And it's a metaphorical restatement of the idea that a tradition can become hidebound, and when it becomes hidebound and too rigid, that it interferes with current adaptation. But the problem is, and this is, I think, this is something we really need to hash out. The problem that you're describing is the problem of a priori structure. Now, some of that's textual, but some of it isn't textual. Some of it resides in us as our psyche, insofar as
the problem I'm describing here is that we have two categories of books in this case, right? We have those written by people like ourselves, just endlessly open for criticism and conjecture, and those written by invisible, omniscient entities.
But I would presume that if these religious systems weren't codified in books, if they were still just enacted or dramatized, you'd have the same objection. It's not the fact that they're in books that's relevant.
Well, no, but it is the dogmatism. It's the fact that we can't jettison the bad parts.
Okay, it's the dogmatism. Okay, so to me, that's the same as the problem of structure. Now, here's the problem, I think, with the way that your argument is laid out. And I'm not saying it's wrong. It seems to me that this is a place where it needs to be developed, because I see that the attempt that you make to derive the world of value from the world of facts as justifiable given what it is that you're attempting to do, which in principle is to make the world a better place. But there's a massive gap in there. It's like, how do you do it? Because the objection that you place on my reasoning, let's say, which is, well, the problem with these texts is that there's an infinite number of interpretations, and which of them how can you determine which of those is canonically correct, is exactly and precisely the same criticism that can be levied against your attempt to extract a world of value from the domain of facts. It's the same problem.
Well, it's not an infinite number of interpretations in either case, but I allow
it's close enough to infinite so that...
Well, it might be. I mean, that's why the moral landscape for me is a landscape of peaks and valleys. And so, I'm totally open to the possibility, in fact, certainty, that there are different ways for similar minds, and certainly different ways for different minds, to be constellated so that they have equivalent but irreconcilable peaks on the landscape. So there's a lot of well-being over here, and there's a lot of well-being over here, and there's a valley in between. And so it's a kind of moral relativism. It's kind of like, this is great and this is great, but these are irreconcilable, right?
Well, I'd like to see that made more concrete, and I need to know how that fits in with your conception, because one of the claims that you make in the moral landscape is that the distinction between the bad life and the good life is not only it's a factual distinction.
Yeah.
It's universally apprehensible and true. I think it's your fundamental axiomatic claim. And I don't see how that's commensurate with the position that you just put forward.
Well, so here's the position. And you can forget about morality as a concept for this. I mean, I think the starting point is deeper than morality. The starting point, and this is our starting point all of us right now in the universe. The starting point is we are conscious, right? We have a circumstance that admits of qualitative experience. And again, this is true however we understand consciousness, whatever is actually happening. We could be living in a simulation, this could be a dream, you could be a brain in a vat. Consciousness could just be the product of neurochemistry, or we could have eternal souls running on somehow integrated with the brain. Whatever is true, something seems to be happening. And these seemings can be really, really bad or really, really good. We know each one of us in our lives have experienced this range of possibility. And yes, there are caveats here. There are hard and painful experiences that have a silver lining, right, that give you some other capacity, where you could say, well, that really sucked, but I'm a better person for it, right? And we can understand what it means to be a better person for it in terms, again, of this range of experience, which I'm calling, subsuming all of this, the positive end of this as well-being, which is to say that I'm a better person for it because now, having endured that ordeal, I am capable of much greater compassion, or I appreciate my life more. The cancer made me a better person. Now that I'm cured, I value each moment of life more than I ever did. All of these claims are intelligible within a context of an open-ended context of exploring this space of possible experience. So what I'm saying is forget about morality, forget about right and wrong and good and evil. What is undeniable is that what we have here is a navigation problem. We have a space of possible experience. And again, this is not just a human problem, this is a problem for any possible conscious mind. We have a space of possible experience in which we can navigate, and things can get excruciating and pointlessly horrible, where there are no silver linings. And this can happen individually in some episode of madness that never ends. If there really is a Christian hell to go to, well, then it's going to happen to me after I die, right? Given what I've said on this stage. And so it matters who's right. Obviously, if I knew that an eternity of fiery torment awaited somebody who didn't make the right noises about one faith or another, well, then it would only be rational to make those right noises, right? So it's my bet. I'm placing a bet on certain pictures of reality being wrong. But the reality is we're navigating in this space, and morality and ethics are the terms we use for how we think about our behavior affecting one another's experience. So if you're in a moral solitude, if you're on a desert island, or if you're alone in the universe, morality is not the issue you need to worry about, but well-being still is an ever-present issue. It's possible to suffer, and it's possible to experience bliss and perhaps something beyond that. And the horizon in both directions is something we'll never fully explore very likely. I mean, we don't know how good things can get, and we don't know how bad they can get, but that there's a spectrum here is undeniable. And I would say that my moral realism simply entails that we acknowledge that it's possible not to know what you're missing. It's possible to be living in a way where you are less happy than you could be and not to know why, right? And to just not have the wisdom to make the changes. And that matters. If anything matters, that matters. And it matters to us individually, and it matters to us collectively. And that mattering subsumes everything we can intelligibly want in this domain of value. And so again, the cash value of any value claim is in the actual or potential change in consciousness for some conscious system somewhere, sometime. And that's my claim. And that's.
Can I try to get? I would like you each to clarify something. So it sounds to me, Sam, like you are hypothesizing that a rationalist approach will always beat a traditional metaphorical approach with respect to the generation of well-being.
Well, not always, but there's so many obvious downsides to the traditional sectarian dogmatic approach that we should want to get out of the religion business as fast as possible.
Okay, but as fast as possible, but do you mean that it has always been true that we should always have gotten away from it as fast as possible, or do you mean now we should get away from it as fast as possible, but there's a point somewhere in the past where it might have been true that actually the best, the most, the richest path to well-being might have been encoded metaphorically?
Oh, yeah, that's certainly possible. And in fact, you might even say it was likely based on the fact that we have all of these systems still around. Right?
Okay. So we still have the systems around in part because we still think in metaphor, and we actually can't help it because half of our brain is oriented towards metaphor. But
can I get you to clarify something now?
Yes.
Okay. So you have argued, and you've actually quite surprised me by doing so, you've argued that the dogmatism is a bug and not a feature. You've argued...
No, it's a bug and a feature.
Okay, it's a bug and a feature. Good. So,
yes.
But what I thought I heard you say was that the resistance to update was a problem, that effectively it was an obstacle.
Yeah, so is lack of resistance to update.
Right, okay,
There's
good.
problems everywhere, man.
Well, there's a tension. Okay.
There is a tension.
There's a tension.
There's a terrible tension.
Okay.
Right, well, look at it this way. Look at it this way. Most new ideas are stupid and dangerous.
Yeah. But most
some
old
of them
ideas
vital.
are as well. I mean,
But some of them are vital, right? And so we're screwed both ways. It's like, well, if we stay locked in our current mode of apprehension, all hell's going to break loose. If we generate a whole bunch of new solutions, most of them are going to be wrong and we're going to die. And so what we need to do is, well, it's a Darwinian claim in some sense, is that despite the fact that most new ideas are stupid and dangerous, a subset of them are so vital that if we don't incorporate them, we're all going to perish. That's the bloody existential condition. And so now, and part of the issue here, and I think that this is, the problem is that, let's take the dogma idea. Okay, so there's the dogma incorporated in the books, but I'm going to throw away the books because the dogma was there before the books. And then the question is, where was the dogma? And the answer was, the dogma was in the cultural practices, and in the agreement that people made with regards to those cultural practices, but it was also part and parcel of the intrapsychic structure that enables us to perceive the world as such. Now, the problem is, and I think this is the central place where we need to flesh out these ideas, is that you cannot view the world without an a priori structure, and that a priori structure has a dogmatic element. And so you can't just say, well, let's get rid of the dogma, because you can't perceive the world without a structure.
It has an uninspected element. I mean, so if you're talking about just perceiving the world, yes, we have perceptual structure that allows for us to perceive the world, and we know that there are failure states, right? So we know, for instance, that we've evolved to perceive, in visual space, based on a literally neurological expectation that light sources will be from above, right? And so we know that we can produce visual illusions based on gaming that expectation, right? But that's not the same thing as a dogma subscribed to by some subset of humanity that is antithetical to another dogma subscribed to by another set of humanity that has nothing to do with underlying biology. That's something that's changeable.
It's not so obvious.
No, but it's changeable in real time based on just conversations like this. Like, we could have, I get emails from people who can point to the paragraph where they lost their faith, right? Where in reading Richard Dawkins or hearing a debate between me and some theologian, where it's just a collision against rationality, which is so useful in every other context, suddenly proves its utility in this context where they think, well, okay, clearly I know the Muslims are wrong about the status of the Quran. Let me take that spirit of criticism in the internal space of my own culture, and what moves? Well, a dogmatic attachment to Christianity has to move by that same standard.
Well,
and it's possible to do that, and that's not a matter of getting into the brain and changing your perceptual apparatus that has...
Well, the distinction between different levels of what would you call it, structure-related processing in the brain and the relationship to the underlying biology isn't clear. And it isn't clear when that's biological and when it isn't. So, your comments about our a priori perceptual structures notwithstanding, there's no clear line between what constitutes an instantiated, accurate biological perception and something that shades more into a cultural presupposition. So it's a gray area. Now, here, let me ask you a question. So this is one of the things I've been thinking about. So this is designed to point out I'm not making the claim that the idea that we should ground values in facts is wrong. I'm not going to make that claim, although I think it's way more complicated than we've opened up so far. But I would say is, I think, relatively easily demonstrate a situation in which you cannot find the value from the facts. So let's say you own an antique. Okay, it's valuable. And you think, I'm going to take this antique apart and I'm going to find out where the value is. Good luck, man.
Well, it's not valuable in that sense.
Wait a second. So we need to know, so that's right, it's not valuable in that sense, because the value of the antique is a social agreement about its position in a hierarchy. It has nothing to do with the material substrate of the antique.
Well, sure.
Yeah, but not, you can't, it's not just sure. It's that you've made the claim already that you can derive values from facts. It's like, then what are you willing to accept as a fact?
These are facts about, again, so there are facts about, the facts exist in intersubjective space, right? So if I tell you, well, this glass, this isn't just an ordinary glass, I know it looks just like that one, but this is the glass that Elton John drank from in his last concert here,
yeah,
right?
Right.
So, what do you want to pay me for it, right?
Right.
It could be that, you're just the biggest Elton John fan ever, and it's worth quite a lot to you. Now it's a kind of evident, it's not value intrinsic to the glass, but
right.
it is a...
Where's the value located?
Well, it's a measure in the change this provokes in your experience, right? Just the idea. I mean, we value ideas as much as anything else, and that's hence the mad work done by religion, right? I mean, because these aren't facts on the ground; these are ideas that rule people's lives. I mean, people spend their whole life afraid of hell.
Okay,
right?
It seems to me that it's easier in some sense, rather than to relate the value of that, and I love the Elton John's glass example. I was going to use Elvis Presley's guitar.
It's here. I will tell it to you.
It's like, where in the guitar is the fact that it's Elvis Presley's guitar? Well, it's nowhere in the guitar. Well, what is it in? Where is it then? And the answer is, it's in the dominance hierarchy of values that's been socially constructed around the guitar. It's located in interpersonal space. And that location, so value is located in interpersonal space. And if you want to say, well, that's also a fact, it's like, okay, but we're starting to stretch
it's a fact
the
about
dimension.
the beliefs and desires and conscious states of all the people involved.
Okay,
right?
well,
that's the only place where it exists. That's the only place where the idea of Elvis's guitar can show up.
Okay, well, I'm trying to figure out then, you see, because what seems to me to be happening, at least in part, is that we can stretch the domain of what constitutes a fact so that the domain of facts starts to incorporate the domain of values. But we do that with doing some damage to the domain of facts.
No,
well,
not at all.
Hang on, don't just say no. This is really...
I'll say more.
This is really complicated because, you see, part of what the postmodernists have done is that they've pushed away the domain of facts entirely, and they say, well, the only thing is that the only thing that actually exists is this domain of intersubjective agreement. And
you and I are on the same page with respect to postmodernism.
Right, but you have to give the devil his due as well. They pointed out something, and what they pointed out is that it's not so easy to localize the structure that attributes to facts their value. It's not a simple thing.
Now, wait.
Yes.
You would surely agree that if we had Elvis Presley's guitar, that guitar would have a material impact on people. We could tell them, this is Elvis Presley's guitar. Some fraction of them would disbelieve it. Somebody might be able to establish it based on a picture or something like that. And the point is, it would have a value that would alter the behavior of people with respect to that object in a material way.
Yes, it would alter the behavior of the people.
So the value could be manifest in physical space.
Which part of it? The
behavior?
behavior?
We could detect it. We could figure out what the value of this guitar is based on some intersection
Sure, we could take a behaviorist approach and we could see how much work people were willing to do to
but
make
also
contact with the guitar.
We can scan their brains and see what...
I'm not so sure we can do that.
Well, clearly the brain is involved.
Hypothetically, we can do it, but practically we're not so good at it. Because the MRI data, generally speaking, is junk.
Well, we can table that.
That
will be a profoundly controversial statement in MRI circles.
Fair enough.
I don't think we need it. We
don't need it, but
let's go with
that a market will establish the value of the guitar.
The brain, as yet incompletely understood, is surely involved in the valuing of this object, right? And so if I tell you that this is, and again, we can take it out of intersubjective space because you could be in a value solitude with respect to any given object. So it could just be, you could have a sentimental attachment to your watch that's worth exactly $25 because that's what you paid for it, but this is the watch that, this is your first watch or whatever it is, and you wouldn't sell it for any amount of money.
Right.
That's a behavioral measure of how much you value it. And if I told you, oh, well, sorry, I borrowed your watch and lost it, what the cascade of negative affect that I see on your face is correlated with something that's happening in your head, and the brain is involved, right? So the totality of that picture
what you're basically stating,
is the
as far
value.
as I can tell, is that there'd be a socio-cultural agreement as to the value of whatever this entity is, and that would find its mirror in the brain. And that's a non-controversial statement, because all socio-cultural phenomena that are experienced find their reflection in the brain. The fact that you can say that that's reflected in the brain is like,
right,
yes,
but
okay,
the
I don't
problem
understand why
we continually run into with religion is that you have a domain of so-called sacred values where people who are otherwise rational cease to be rational actors. So this is the reason why Israel and the Israelis and the Palestinians can't negotiate as though their problems could be solved by a real estate transaction is because they have irrational and irreconcilable claims upon land and buildings.
Do you think they're any
Actually,
more?
I don't
Do you
think
think
you know
they're any
that.
more irrational than the claim that glass is worth something more?
Well, no, it's
because
just
it was near-
it's
because it was
like
near
that.
Elton?
It's like that. But I'm
But
saying
that's not irrational by your own definition. You just said that was actually constituted a fact.
Well, no,
And so
it's a fact about people, right? So there are. This is okay.
Okay.
Should be a little careful here
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it gets confusing.
Yeah.
We can make objective claims about subjective experience, right? We use this word objective and subjective in different ways. We use it in epistemological ways and ontological ways. And
give me just 1 sec to make sure I'm on the same page as you.
Well, so I can illustrate by way of example. If I say that that's just your subjective opinion, right? I'm denigrating. I'm saying that this is an expression of your bias. This is true for you, but it's not true out in the world, right? That's one way I can use the subjective objective distinction, and that's an epistemological way. Like you're ruled by bias. You're not thinking straight. I don't have to take your opinion seriously. That's subjective. I'm worried about objective facts. But people get confused. They think that objective facts only means the material world and what's really in this glass as a material object. No, we can be much more objective than that. We can make objective claims about the subjective experience of people like ourselves. I can make an infinite number of objective claims about the experience. This is the example I always use, but I just happen to love it. What was JFK thinking the moment he got shot, right? Now that's it. We don't know, so we'll never get the data, right? So the truth or falseness of what I'm about to say can't be predicated on actually getting access to the data because he's not around and his brain's not around to scan. But you and I both know an infinite number of things he wasn't thinking about. We can make an objective claim about his subjectivity. I know he wasn't thinking, well, I hope Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris work it out on stage that night, right? And an infinite number of things like that. He was thinking something, he was experiencing something, but we don't know what it is. So when I'm talking about this domain of value, I'm saying that it exists in this landscape of actual and possible conscious experience for human beings and any other system like us that can experience this range of suffering and happiness.
Well, okay, so and partly what I'm trying to do is to actually determine what that structure is.
Well, in our case, it's certainly connected to the evolved structure of our brain.
Yeah, but I want to go way deeper into the brain.
It's augmented by everything else we do.
I want to go way deeper into the idea than it's connected with brain states, because it's definitely connected with brain states. The question is, at least in part, how, and what does that mean? And I think that the neuroscience has progressed far enough so that we can do quite a good job of this. And so, but I want to return to one thing, and maybe I'll outline a little bit of this. And when you talked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you said that was irrational. And so, look, fair enough. People have been locked with their hands around each other's necks there for 3,000 years. But there's a problem there. And the problem is that people are looking at the landscape from a contextualized perspective, right? It's not just a piece of land. It's their piece of land. It's like your house or maybe your favorite shirt. It's like, well, you say, well, I have a favorite shirt. It's like, well, there's nothing inherent in the shirt that makes it your favorite. No, it's a subjective judgment. It's like, well, then is that a fact? Well, yes, it's a fact. It's a fact about subjective judgment. It's okay. Well, the Israeli claim on the land and the Palestinian claim on the land is a subjective judgment that's a fact.
Yeah,
it's like, so how is it irrational?
Because it is the true analogy here, the complete analogy is rather like we're about to fight over Elton John's glass, and Elton John was never here, right?
Well,
so I'm not saying so it clearly still matters to us in our misapprehension of our situation. We still really care, and these are objectively true claims about the level of at which we value things. And hence the impasse.
Well,
but it matters
I
if
think that's counterproductive dismissive. Like you could say, well,
it's really not. When you look at the specific claims, it's really not.
Look, you took the contextual interpretation to its absolute extreme. You said, well, there's multiple reasons why different people who occupy the same piece of land are going to feel about it in different ways.
Sure.
Okay,
and most of those reasons are amenable to some kind of rational compromise.
Well,
I mean, there's actually there's studies on this. I mean, there's studies done by people who I disagree with.
When you say the word rational in that context, you're using it as a black box that contains the concept proper way of thinking about it. It's like it's not so obvious in most situations what the rational approach is.
Well,
otherwise, life would be very, very simple.
I have an obvious one here, and that's that whatever the Christians and the Muslims and the Jews think they're getting from their attachment to their dogmatic and irreconcilable religious worldviews can be gotten just as well by a deeper understanding of our universal and non-culturally bound capacity for ethical experience, spiritual experience, community building, and we can touch that space.
What's that grounded in?
We can touch that space
Fine.
It's almost like the status quo is. It's almost like you're content to live in a world, or at least you're content not to judge too harshly a world where fans of rival soccer teams or baseball teams regularly kill one another over their fandom, right? Like what if that were the status quo? It's like it's been this way for thousands of years. There must be a reason for it.
Look,
people really like sports.
I'm not trying to justify the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
No, but
I'm saying that
we
casual
shouldn't be too
attempts
quick to judge the sanctity of their differences of opinion.
Okay, but wait a minute, Sam. There, you made a claim. Like your claim was that if the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims would just stop their stupidity and adopt this universal ethic, then everything would be okay. It's like, okay, what's the basis for the universal ethic? Like that's
a non-problem. No one's going in search of that. The truth is, I mean, that's an interesting problem for philosophers and for scientists. That's not actually where the rubber meets the road for people living their lives well. I mean, this is analogous to me.
Sure it is. It's associated in your book with the difference between the bad and the good life.
I really care about all of this, and my job as a philosopher, as a moral philosopher in that case, is to make the best case I can for these ideas. But the truth is, I mean, it is analogous to when you get into a debate with a Christian fundamentalist in the States. Very often, this person will pretend to care about cosmology or evolution as though it's the most important thing in the world, as though you can't get out of bed in the morning and figure out how to treat your friends and family well unless you figure out what happened before the Big Bang, right? No one really lives their lives that way, and yet we have convinced ourselves that this is a sensible way of talking about the conflict between religion and science.
So hold on. I think you have arrived at the core of your conflict right here, and I actually hear you both loud and clear. Your point is that if the people faced with the question were to, start with a fresh sheet of paper, look at the Middle East, they could arrive at a compromise that they as individuals might find put them way ahead and is more profitable than the situation that they are continually finding themselves in.
Yeah.
And that might be the case. On the other hand, the reason that they don't is that historically those who have been outcompeted by those who haven't. So the point is, the universe and the fact that it refuses to solve that conflict is telling us that there is some reason that people who take that prospect seriously are not actually correct in some at least metaphorical way. So in other words, what is it to have a sentimental attachment to some piece of territory somewhere? That sounds completely irrational. On the other hand, that sentimental attachment may result in you continuing for 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 years, whereas if you surrendered it because it was irrational, you might go extinct. Now, should you care that your lineage is going to go extinct? Maybe, arguably not. On the other hand, it's hard to imagine that what you're saying is so thoroughly grounded that it can justify causing people to alter their perspective on value in such a way that it might actually drive them extinct. It's not clear that that's a good
clearly,
thing.
I mean, secularism, we're talking about the fringe here. We're talking about, when you're talking about, in this case, the Israeli settlers and the Palestinian terrorists, right? Like we should all breathe a sigh of relief that kind of passion and attachment to land doesn't characterize most of humanity.
It does if you're trying to defend your house.
So,
but that's
can I
kind of a
turn
different
that
topic.
back on
Yes.
Jordan? Because I think this is where the crux of it is.
Well,
so if we
yes.
follow the idea that this is actually that the seemingly sentimental and irrational attachment to the piece of land is some sort of meta-rationality, which sounds like your perspective, then we are now confronted with the question of, all right, if it is an evolved kind of meta-rationality that is being manifest in stories that cause people to behave in ways that Sam sees as clearly irrational, then we are stuck with the naturalistic fallacy, which is to say, so for those who don't know, the naturalistic fallacy says that just because something is doesn't mean it ought, right? The fact that selection favors something doesn't make it good. When the Aztecs sacrifice their enemies, it is good for continuing Aztecness, but it may not be good in some absolute moral sense. So here's the question for you.
Yep.
You're arguing for, I think, an evolutionarily very viable explanation for religious belief and dogma, but aren't you stuck with the downside of it, where much of what is encoded in that way may actually be abhorrent morally and consciously?
Absolutely.
Okay, so
No doubt about it.
what do we do about
Well,
that?
this is exactly
Do you have
why.
a sorting algorithm?
Yes.
What is
I'm
it?
trying to get to it.
Okay.
Okay, so this is actually why I asked Sam this question. It wasn't an attack. It's like, okay, so look, people have these belief systems, Christian, Muslim, Jew, we'll say for that, and you're saying abandon those, let's say, and move towards this transcendent rationality. It's like, okay, two problems. It's not so easy to abandon a belief system because you end up in the morally relativist nihilist pit, and that's a problem.
One doesn't have to, and
Well,
many people don't.
people tend to, and so it's a
Well, no,
very
I mean,
major problem.
It's just not, I mean,
No, they don't have to. Look,
wait.
Sam,
That's an empirical
right.
claim that we'd
don't-
have to find out whether that's true,
well,
but there's a lot of evidence against that.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of evidence for it too, but it's beside the point to some degree because that isn't something that I want to quibble about. Perhaps there are transitional paths, and sometimes people find a collapse of their faith actually freeing. It's certainly the case that many of the people who are happy about what you're doing have found exactly that in what you've been saying, and more power to you. And so I'm not willing to dispute that. But what you said was, okay, here's these belief systems that are ancient and complex, and we can step outside of them, and there's this transcendent rationality that we could all aspire to that would solve the problems. It's like, okay, what is it?
Well,
what is it exactly?
It is, at a minimum, to value all of the variables that conspire to make the one life we know we have
Okay, you
worth
can't
living.
value all those variables.
Well, no, we're doing it right. We do it every day in how we organize
No, we
ourselves
don't,
in
because
society.
we apply an a priori framework to the variables to reduce them to a tiny subset that we can manage. And it's the nature of that a priori framework that we haven't been able to have a discussion about. We have an a priori framework that narrows our perception to almost nothing. It's built into us. It's partly socially constructed. It has a deep neurological substrate. And we actually understand how it emerges to a large degree. And the thing is that...
But I don't think that's actually our difference. I mean, so the a priori framework operates in many different spaces, which again, we can't necessarily analyze, but it makes it no less true. So if you put your hand on a hot stove, you will immediately feel a very good reason, in fact, an unarguably good reason to remove it, right? And it doesn't require moral philosophy to get you there. You don't need to inspect your a priori framework. You just have to feel, holy shit, this is the worst thing I've ever felt, right? And there's so many moments like that in life that we dimly understand sometimes.
What if you're trying to rescue your child from a fire?
Well, exactly. Then you have some other goal, right?
Yes,
that
you
is going to
certainly do.
cause you to brave that suffering, right?
Yes.
But again, trying to rescue your child from a fire is pretty close to the hot stove in not needing to be analyzed, right? The imperative to rescue it becomes harder when you have to rescue someone else's child from a fire, and you're worried about orphaning your child who's standing next to you on the sidewalk, right? Then we get into the domain of moral philosophy, and then you can say, well, how much do each of us owe the children of other people, right? How much should I risk my life and risk orphaning my child to rescue your child? That's when things get interesting in a philosophy seminar, and that's where people begin to hesitate. We are biased toward protecting ourselves, protecting our kin, protecting our friends, and only then do we begin to extend the circle. And again, but this is not a mystery where we want to go here. We want to extend the circle more and more and build institutions and societies that implement our best selves at our best moments more and more. It makes it more effortless to be good in the world.